Lately, I've been working a lot with sculpture and porcelain to create these swimming scenes and kind of explore contemporary art issues through the lens of swimming, competitive swimming. In the past, I've worked with painting and sculpey and fake fur and mixed media, found objects.
Nice. How is material important to the work you make?
I think when I'm using materials, usually I use a material because I find its history is like very interesting. So like porcelain, there's this whole narrative about the porcelain trade from China, but there's also this fragility to it. When I choose a material to use, often I'm thinking about the aesthetic qualities of the material. So when I'm using porcelain in these, in the swimming series, for example, what I like about the porcelain is how fragile it is, but also how translucent it is. It kind of feels a bit like skin. I mean, obviously it's like stone, but while you're looking at it, it has this translucent quality that's like really interesting. But it's also an industrial material. So I find that kind of push and pull between using like hand-built ceramic porcelain objects against a field of machine-created porcelain tile. I think there's like an interesting conversation there. But when I'm using a material, it's usually just to get a point across, and often I try not to get as hung up on the material of the piece and instead with like the final object itself. I would say my process is very chaotic. Usually I start a lot with sketches or I'll write down a bunch of ideas and then I'll forget about them, and then years later I'll come back to those ideas, or I'll have a material that's sitting on my desk or objects that I've made didn't really go anywhere, and I'll play around with them. And usually my whole process organically flows as I'm working in the studio. I feel most of the artwork I create doesn't have a very definite A, B, and C. It's kind of like I start off here and then I get bored of that, and so I move down here, and then I get bored of that, or maybe I don't get bored of that. I just see it's kind of limited in potential, and then I'll move back up to this point, or I'll move over there, and it's all just a mess. The body of work I've been most preoccupied with for like the last year, starting in like 2018, and it kind of came off of me wanting to do something radically different than the monster pieces I was doing for a long time. And I grew up, when I was growing up as a kid, I did a lot of competitive swimming, and I was actually kind of good at it. Like one or two strokes, the rest of them like freestyle, I just couldn't do it, couldn't hack it. So I grew up around pools mainly. And I find the competition in swimming to be a lot more interesting and more akin to art making than it is to like football or like basketball. Because it's a team sport, but it's not really a team sport. You know, you're competing, when you're at a swim meet, you're also competing against the people in your swim team. And really what boils down to like all the competition is just against yourself when you're swimming. So you're always trying to improve yourself while you're swimming, which is, I guess that's all sports. But I feel there's something more to it there. There's also a lot of different feelings you can evoke of being in a pool. There's almost an isolation when you're swimming in competition. You know, everything's so loud around you, and all you're focused on is just getting from one end to the other end to the other end, and back and forth. Yeah, while you're in there, it's almost like you're in this whole other space, like three-dimensional space that you can traverse. That's completely different than just being in like track and field or football. It's almost like you're in like a different dimension. Yeah. I think if anything, I just want to like give the world a better sense of my own interior life, is like wanting to kind of tell the world what I'm experiencing. I think public art's almost historical in a way. Like the Romans and the Greeks all had like public art, and like the Persians had like the lamassu that would like decorate their buildings. Like public art's like an ever-present facet of human culture. There's this kind of need to show artistic messages in the public square space for like different reasons. So I feel like maybe public art's, there's like a need for it. Like I couldn't expect like to go into a city and not see public art. Like that'd be weird. You know, just be all these buildings with like nothing there. There's almost like a need for public art to say that like people live here, and this is who lives here. Art belongs everywhere. In the house, in the museum, everywhere.